Hello, everybody, and welcome back to End Zone to End Zone, our Synced Up Designs podcast about the pageantry arts. We've got a little special mini episode today with some very awesome guests from our team. I'm Dan Twyford, your sales manager at Synced Up Designs, and today we are joined by
Joe Fant
and
Jeff Watkins.
Joe and Jeff happen to be wealths of knowledge when it comes to drumline in general, and specifically bass drumming and teaching many bass drum lines between the two of them. I don't know what the count is, but it's big. A lot of bass drum knowledge between these two guys and just drumline and marching arts knowledge. So we thought we'd take some time while we've got everybody in the office here and drop some knowledge on you all about bass drumming. And I think this is going to be a really valuable experience for anybody who is maybe, not a specific bass drum expert. Maybe you're just a drumline person, but you didn't necessarily play on the bass line. Maybe you're the percussion person for your school, but you are more of a mallet player and, again, never had to be responsible for that aspect. Or maybe you're a band director who just runs the whole show, and this will be some really great helpful tips for you about how to maintain that equipment, how to make success come out of that section a little bit better. So before I go any further, I want to give these two a chance to kind of introduce themselves and what they've done, just so you know where they're coming from as we discuss the topic. Between the two of them, there's a lot of medals, success in general, competitively, and a lot of students who have gone on and kept teaching the things that they taught them. So I think you're going to get a lot of that today. But I'll start with Joe. Joe, if you want to walk everybody through where you're coming from in the world of bass drumming.
Sure, we were just joking and laughing about, with 1 year, I have a 4-decade footprint in drum corps, starting in 1989 with Southwind when I was I was 13, I just turned 14, and then was there for 3 summers, and then went on to the Cavaliers and was there from 93 through 96 as a member. And then I started teaching Carolina Crown immediately after my age-out summer in 1997, and then in 98 with Paul Rennick in 98. Then in 99 and 2001, I moved on over to the Blue Knights out in Denver. Got to teach with Ralph Hardiman and Micah Bruce and some other great people. And then went to the Cavaliers with the alumni corps, not the alumni corps, but the where I marched and taught there in 2002, and then taught Santa Clara Vanguard in 2005, and then went back to the Blue Knights and did a couple of summers, and I believe it was 12 and 13 is when it was. And then also just indoor-wise, numerous high schools. I taught Mystique in 02, 03, and then again in 9, 10, and 11, Blue Knights. During that meantime, in between Mystique, I moved up to Colorado and was teaching the indoor group, and actually wrote for the battery for the indoor group in 06, 7, and 8. So
not too shabby. Throw a Cavaliers 02 in there. Throw a Mystique 2011 in there.
Ooh. Yeah.
Gosh.
Those are fun years.
Yes. All right, and Jeff.
Yeah, so I marched in the Connecticut Hurricanes in 2006. I was 15 that summer. I marched there for 4 years. Went to Blue Stars under Tom Ungst in 2010. Marched there in 2011. Went to Bluecoats under Mike Jackson and Roger Carter. Aged out there in 2012. Did 3 years of Mystique. 2011, we overlapped 1 year and aged out in 13 from that baseline. Went back and taught Blue Stars under the Mapes and Grom, Eric Shriver lines from 13 to 18. Got kind of back in the drum corps game with Colts in 21, and went on the road with Bluecoats this past summer.
Congratulations.
Getting ready for another season there.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Recent gold.
Yeah,
Very awesome.
solid team. It was great.
Gold.
Great to get back in that.
Yeah.
Get back in the saddle with those guys.
Yep.
A lot of old friends there.
Amazing. Again, not too shabby as far as drumline.
It's always fun when you get back to the alumni group, where you started and where you cut your teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's,
fun.
12 years later, it's in a lot of ways a completely different drum corps, but still it feels still feels like home. For
sure.
It's cool.
I think both of you share that when you marched the group to when you got to go back and teach, like it feels good to be able to be like, yeah, I marched here. You know, like it just got even better and even better. I mean, obviously, like mid '90s, you know, who's not a fan of '95? I mean, but
Lots of people.
yeah, okay,
Depends on what coast you're on.
right, yeah, nailed it. Yeah, in fact. But yeah, so a wealth of knowledge. We're really excited to have you guys here, and I just wanted to jump into some topics again. I think we're going to focus this episode not so much on like, you know, if you're a bass drum master already, you know, and you don't have it right, we're going to do this instead. But more so, I think the majority of listeners out there and the majority of you who might share a clip of this, I think are going to really relate to just how to approach this whole topic if it's not your thing. And I bet even if you are a bass drum expert, even if you are a battery expert out there, hopefully you'll find something in here that you can forward to a friend, share with them, and change their program for the better by a little bit. So what if we start at the top of this whole thing with picking out which bass drums. You've got the ability to choose your instruments. Maybe you just got the budget to choose a drum line, you know, and maybe you can talk a little bit both about from a middle school or a high school program. What is a good choice in your eyes?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it depends. It has a lot to do with the size of the band and kind of what your balance goals are going to be. An all maple shell from Pearl or Yamaha or Tama are all maple shells. They're going to give you, you know, the most projection. Pearl just came out with their birch line recently that would be, you know, more suited for a smaller band where you don't have to cut through, you know, like 80 brass, you know.
Right.
And a lot of times high school lines don't need that much projection. You don't, bass drums are loud. You don't want to overpower your band with the drums that are going to cut through the most. So I would say it's really kind of down to what your goals and what your needs are from that section.
Let's say working as a manufacturer's rep for all the years, and then working for dealers, and then actually taking care of the dealers. I always, without fail, I will recommend to a band, especially if they're going to do indoor and outdoor, 16, 18, 20, then 24 and 28, because you need that gap just to get some space in your tuning, just to get the intervals. I mean, and every band's going to have, you know, big Pookie that can carry the 28. You know, 28 is really not that big of a drum. You know, like drum corps back in my day, you know, we marched 32s and we killed ourselves over these things.
Right.
I don't think a lot of drum corps maybe aren't marching 32s anymore.
There's a few, but yeah.
There's a few,
not a
but
lot
I mean,
left.
everyone was doing 32s back then, and it was going back at it. You know, like I did it in 1993, and it was awful. It was an awful experience with that drum. Just the drum, great experience in the drum corps, but
Yeah.
that drum, you know, it was not fun to have to lug around all day. You know, and I'm paying for it dearly now.
Sure.
You know, with chiropractic visits and massages. But that's the payoff is the massages. Those are good.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I'd say without fail, 16 is everyone's going to have, you know, some small kids, you know, some 8th graders or some 9th graders that are going to need smaller drums, and then that translates really well for indoor, you know, because you can get higher pitched, because the higher pitch in indoor is gonna cut more usually.
Right.
You know, at least in my experience.
Yep. I like 2 points that you guys brought up. One is, what's the role of the bass drums in the band anyway, right? Like they obviously provide a really important tempo center at times, you know, kind of framing out the drumline melody. You know, when you strip it all down, like the bottom bass of your band has a very important job. You know, almost in every show, there's going to be some moments where tempo's coming from the bass line or from bottom bass. Mm-hmm. But to Jeff's point, you don't necessarily need, you know, not every band is trying to overpower 80 brass. Not everybody is a drum corps cutting through that big. And then the second great point I think that you both touched on is, what performers do you actually have physically? If you don't have a regular rotation of bigger kids who might be able to carry a 30 or a 32, then don't buy that, right?
And you know, in the birch versus maple thing, I mean, you can make any drum sound good the way you tune and the way you muffle. And then, of course, the way you play,
right?
The way you approach the drum is key. Because the cadets, you know, for years went out there with the little 1.25-inch air conditioned muffling or whatever they call that stuff, and they have that on the outside of the drum. You get up close and it kind of has that basketball sound. Then you get away and they sound like $1 million.
Yep.
You get 20 feet away and they sound better than, in my opinion, better than anyone. For 25, 30 years, man. Or maybe even longer than that. From like probably 87, until they went away. You get in the stands and they sound like $1 million.
Sure.
Yeah,
You
wanna be
hear every
heard.
single note.
You want to be heard in those big stadiums, in a dome especially.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the reality for a lot of high school programs is most bass lines are going to be your younger students. They're not going to be your biggest kids. I played bottom bass as a freshman in high school, a little string bean, and it was hard. And it was a 26, I think,
Yeah.
So it's like, forget a 32.
Oh yeah, and the moment you
wouldn't be
play
here
bottom
today.
bass, and then the next year when you put that 20 on,
Right.
it's like marching air, and
Yeah.
it's a beautiful thing.
Do you think, to that point, do you think for a group like a middle school, or if you're going to have freshmen playing on the bass line all the time, do you think a 26 can get the job done as a bottom bass?
I think it could. I wouldn't want to go much lower than that. If you're like a really small band, you could probably get away with a 24 on bottom. But you're limiting your options as far as
Tuning.
how much depth of sound can you get from that low tuning.
Because there's hardly no weight difference from a 26 to a 28.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And at the highest level, like that's my biggest argument for a 32 is it's the same pitch really. You're tuning to an E flat or a D, but you get that extra tension on a bigger drum. It just feels a little better.
Because it's 2 inches wider. The
Feels a
shell's 2
little
inches
better for the
or
player.
2 inches wider too.
Yeah, for sure. So you kind of get the opposite with a smaller drum, still at that same low pitch. You tune a 24 to a D, and it's like you barely have to turn the key at all.
Right. But there's going to be a loss of projection too when you have to go with a super low tuning on a drum. It's just not going to be able to throw air as fast.
Right.
And bass drums are directional, of course. This should be mentioned. In the drill and the staging, if you have something, musical information you need to hear out of the bass line, you need to make sure that they're staged and facing the audience in a way that's going to shoot the sound that way. If you have them facing forward and their heads are facing the end zones, it's going to be harder to absorb that.
Can I say something about facings real quick?
Please.
The more, so I judge quite a bit, especially in the winter, and I don't really notice it a lot in the winter. But the 3 to 4 to 5 shows that I do in the fall, I'm seeing more and more bass lines that come out, and if their left heads are facing the audience, which is probably 50 to 60% of the show, they're trying to play everything off the left hand. I don't get that. Because that's when it starts to suffer, and you start talking, doing critiques. Well, their left hands are facing the crowd. So what? I mean, if you're playing better with the right hand, they're directional instruments.
Yeah, there's this idea that you get more sound from the side that's facing, and it's kind of a misnomer. Yeah, because really, whether you're hitting the right head or the left head, both heads are resonating, and both heads are pushing.
And what's going to give you what's
going
to give you the best chance of achievement? It's going to be that right hand, because that's what you're playing most of your exercises off of. The
Sure.
right hand lead.
Right.
If you're playing more than one, if you're playing some twos, or more, you get one of each hand anyway. So you can still see that effect for the visual element. Mm-hmm. You can have your cake and eat it too.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I love the point you guys brought up about listening. Like if you want to decide, maybe you're doing some trial and error about tuning or about head selection or about size of bass drum. Like if you bought more than 5 drums and you get to the luxury of choosing which ones you want to use each season, the best place to evaluate that is in the actual venue that you're going to perform in. Get up in the stands. Your point about like listening up close and being like, oh, that sounds like a basketball bouncing from 2 feet away, but then you get up in the stands and it can cut through.
Yeah.
Night and day difference.
You cannot argue with any of those 90s, late 80s, and all throughout the 90s cadets bass lines.
Yep.
I mean, you just can't.
If y'all don't know what he's talking about, you need to go on YouTube. Check this out, right? We have the benefit of recordings now. Didn't used to.
And I think Boston is the only drum corps who's still using the
air conditioning,
gray
the
foam
weather,
on
the
the
weather
outside.
stripping on the outside.
Outside.
And
And they sound great.
Still works.
They sound great.
Sure does. Yeah, don't quote us on that. There may be somebody else who does, but notably, Boston doing that for a good modern reference. So that's some good thoughts on choosing which instruments to get. Think about your players. think about that a good starting place would be 16, 18, 20, 24, 28. Would you guys both agree that's kind of like a gold standard for a high school drum line?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely would.
Yeah.
For high school, yeah, for sure.
5, yeah.
Right. Okay, how about choosing which players go on the bass line? It is, for me, it was my intro to high school drumline. It was like, oh, he's almost good enough for the snare line, but this other kid's going on vacation who was going to be on the bass line. You're going to be in the bass, you know, and honestly, I am so thankful that I got to do a couple years on bass drum first. Everything I've done in percussion since then has been informed by that.
I'm gonna say, I mean, your Peyton Manning has got to be number 2. You know,
Okay.
like the quarterback's got to be number 2.
Yeah.
Because I mean, that's the person that's going to set the tempo. If the downbeat is always there and the end of 2 or the end of 1 is not there, then your tempo's gone.
Right.
You know, it's like stepping off late almost. You know,
Sure.
on a drill set.
So
They've got the most responsibility. You know,
responsibility.
they've got the most pressure for, you know, as the literature gets, you know, more and more difficult, there's more and more pressure on that 2 drum. So you want somebody who can handle it.
I know I've seen some directors who I may just not have heard this perspective. To us, this is old hat, but to somebody who's coming in, again, maybe bass drums and drumline is not their primary thing, but they're an amazing musical director. But when it comes to setting the bass line, that's can be some minutia. And I think it would be tempting to just give the heaviest drums to the kids who can carry those and the lightest drums to the kids who can carry those and don't even think about it any more than
Right,
that.
right.
But this is a really good point that maybe your most highest aptitude player should be on number 2, specifically to like timing and I guess chops, but
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value. Just you mentioned chops. There's a lot of value in having the bass line drum with the upper battery. I think there's a lot of, you know, snares and quads will go off and learn about rolls, and the basses will go do their own subs. But the bass drummers, you want to know about that too. You know, whether they get to use it as much as those other sections or not, it still informs them so much about their grip and their stroke pathway. And if you're building a high school program, these are your future snare and quad players anyway. So there's not, we hear it from the snare tech or quad tech, I'm not a bass tech, but you know, this and that. A lot of the, you know, drumming fundamentals are still the same. You know, the way that the stick fits in your hand and the way that you want the mallet.
Some back
you know.
finger differences and some fulcrum differences, but
You're working
still,
against
it's the same
gravity.
thing. You're playing against gravity.
It's really the
I say
biggest.
that all the time.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know what that means, when you're playing a flat drum and you drop the stick, it's hitting the drum. When you're playing bass drum, you drop the stick, you're going away from the drum. Your drum's here, and now your mallet's back there, so now you're having to play against gravity versus letting gravity do the work here. So it takes a little more effort,
Yep.
you know, with the back fingers and your stroke path, things
Right.
like that.
But like the result of rebound, it has a similarity. You
Yeah,
know,
for sure.
it's not going to be the same exact experience, but you kind of want similar results as what you would do flat over on the side.
Yeah, and for a high school program, you're trying to train broad percussionists anyway, you know, so it's
Yeah.
That's right.
No, there are some areas, you know, some regions that have, you know, the culture of we're going to be career bass drummers, you know, and that's I love that. You
Sure.
know? And that's why those regions that have that culture, that's why they tend to do extremely well in the,
Yeah.
especially in indoors.
Yep.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to your question earlier about what is the role of a bass line even. You know, it is largely a supportive character, but especially this day and age, you know, we're seeing more and more heavily featured bass lines playing.
Sure. And when I was a member in drum corps and when I was teaching everything, you know, we could play the snare book, we could play the quad book, you know, that we wanted to be able to do that. But we never even thought once about trying to be in those sections or wanting to be in those sections, you know, even though most of us could, you know, and you could probably go to say a lot of the, you know, the top upper echelon groups, you know, those players can play whatever they want.
Oh, yeah.
We just love playing bass drum.
Right.
You know, that's what we love doing. And we're usually the smallest section of the drum corps, you know, or the second smallest. But the quads had maybe 4, you know, sometimes. We're the second smallest section of the drum corps. So you're
Right.
going to be the tightest, you know, the tightest knit group of people. And
Right.
the
Yeah, there's
best,
something
the
so
best buds, you know.
so unique about playing one instrument as 5 people. You know, 10 hands.
I love that.
having to make one sound.
that.
And really, it is largely a solo instrument, which I always thought was so cool. You know, out of 150 people on this field, I am the only one who plays
Yep.
my music.
Sure.
Really, it's like each individual bass drummer, maybe the timpani player, synthesizer player, xylophone. You start to run out of people who could be like, that's my notes right there. You know, like everybody else, you're just like part of it, you know?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. But going back to the picking the right people for the right drums in your high school program, so you're maybe going to give your most talented and, number 2 is going to be responsible for some leadership, for timing leadership. But aside from just second bass, like what's a good consideration for other drums?
So yeah, I mean, it's if you're one of these groups who has a little bit of a stronger bass line that you can feature more, you're gonna want somebody on 1 and 3 who can hang with that 2 guy and give the guy on 2 the downbeats that they need. Size is a factor, you know. It's not the only one, but you need someone who can carry that bottom drum.
Drum 3 is a deceptively hard drum because everyone thinks it's just a downbeat drum. No, sir. No, ma'am.
They're the glue.
It's not. They're the glue because everything changes on a dime and it changes fast. So, I mean, you have to have a thinker that can play 3 as well. It's not an easy drum by any means.
You need a lot of consistency.
Drum 4 is almost like I'd say, like Drew Brees, the quarterback's number 2, the center is probably number 4 maybe.
4's got to wait a lot.
Yeah.
Four has
You got to be patient and smart to play 4.
the same amount of upbeat responsibilities as 2, but just maybe not as often. So you're waiting for that, that and a 4 to finish the phrase, and that person's got to connect to the bottom drum.
Also, depending when you get to the 4 and 5 guys, depending on how you have your drum line stand when they're in an arc, you're getting towards the outside of the arc now too. So like there's some spatial understanding that all bass drummers get. But
Oh yeah, you're on an island. I mean, if you're 2 tapes apart on the back of the indoor floor, you can't really. You don't have the luxury of listening to your neighbor as much as you might think, particularly with the directional.
Well, think about
nature
drum
of the
corps
instrument.
too. Like when you're playing bottom bass, and then your top bass is 10 yards away when you're at 4-step intervals. So you got to have someone that has great ears because when you're taking a line out in the field and you're standing by your bottom guy, you can't hear anything going on north of 4th base.
Right.
You hear your 4 guys, so you're having to really like watch feet and depend on what you can hear, what little bit you can hear, and anticipating timing and.
yeah,
It's got so
there's-
much to do with like hearing what the right version of wrong sounds like.
Yes.
Explaining to that person what you're hearing is not what we're hearing out front, but you've got to kind of learn what that consistency is.
Sometimes you got to lay back. A lot of times you got to have to anticipate.
Yeah, you got to be ready.
I love
And
it.
Even in an arc, if you've got a long enough snare line where they're far off from the center.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like by the time you're out there, the visual cues, speed of light is faster than speed of sound. So like
Absolutely.
really have to be heightened awareness. And I do want to get a little bit more back into that in a little bit here about the experience, like how to describe the right way to approach it. But any final thoughts on choosing the right kids for the right drums, especially high school level? Because I like how we kind of gave attributes to each one of you want somebody who's good at this for this, somebody who's good at this for this, but size is a factor. It's not the only factor, but it is a factor. They have to be able to carry it. Yeah. And while we're on that, you need to do your high school kids a favor and help them physically develop their ability to carry the drums. So I think let's go to the fully wrong way to approach it. You just hand the kids their drums and they wear it at rehearsal and it's just pain and suffering and you never talk to them about it. And then they just enjoy rehearsal less and less over time. That's like the full fail version of it, right?
Yeah, I think marching fitness has really come a long way, even in just the last 3 to 5 years. It's way more of a conversation now, definitely than when I was marching. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Making sure that you're training these muscles to be able to do the physical element.
And a lot of times, like the posture can fix that. Just making sure that everyone has the right posture. Like picking those shoulders up to your ears, and then pulling them back, and then just dropping them on the platform, and making sure you're filling that carrier up. Without being, but being more natural about it.
Right.
That can fix a lot of the.
But certainly core strength, is key. Leg strength, butt strength, for lack of better terms. All
squeeze
that
the
stuff
glutes.
is holding your drum up.
I will say this too about picking the right kid is you got to make sure that you give them something they can achieve at a high level. So if your eighth grader that's playing top bass can't play a triplet roll at 140, then don't write them a triplet roll at 140.
There you go, right? It doesn't have to just be
Right to their strengths. Give them something they can achieve at a high level.
yes.
Can go a long way with some clean twos.
Clean
in A
twos are
class,
great.
You know,
Yeah, achievement.
Absolutely. Where are the dynamics? Where's the ensemble cohesion that section's providing? Are there feet in time? You know, are we doing it as a team? All that kind of stuff.
yeah. Because the reality is, they're going to be in the back of the floor the most.
Yeah.
So whether you know you don't always have the luxury of listening back to the bass line, depending on who those members are, but when you do, I mean, it makes a big difference for the other sections that they're supporting.
Right. Last thing on choosing your baseline members, I think for all 5 drums, one qualification is you're not going on vacation the week of band camp. You're going to be at all the performances. Like, it is very hard to operate the baseline in your ensemble if everybody's not there.
It is tough. Yeah, I marched one summer where bass 4 was on a different type of semester situation, and they had to go back home during move-ins 5 days of the week, come out and drum with us for 2, and then go back again. We spent 5 days covering parts and then
It's always a lot of fun, right?
relearning. It was fun to
Yeah.
play more notes, but then when he came back and I had to remember which parts were not mine to
Yeah.
to play anymore.
Yeah.
Definitely a challenge, especially for an inexperienced line to play against that space.
Something important for the band directors to think about too is the better bass drum line you have and the more musical bass drum line you have, the more of the dynamic spectrum that you experience and achieve, the better band you're going to have. You're going to stay in time. You're going to sound. Your dynamics are going to be a lot more expressive, even if the winds aren't doing them as well. If that bass drum line is doing it, you know, the perception is going to
Absolutely.
be a huge reality.
Yeah, and I think to your point, it's worth it to kind of take a step back on the vocabulary, give them something that they can really achieve, really teach pocket and feel and
Flow.
tempo control
Flow.
for the good of the full ensemble.
The places where bass drum unisons are written in the musical score are typically intentional and needed, you know, big goalposts in the score. You know, like, we need those as foundational structure. So
Write as few as possible.
write as few unisons as possible.
They really matter. You know,
love it.
when
Right.
there's when there's less of them, when you do get that unison moment, it's a lot more meaningful. You know, it's like shots. You know, if every beat 4 is a shot, you know, they start to kind of lose their meaning.
Yeah.
But when you save the unit, you can just as easily use bottom bass in the moments when it doesn't need to be the most impactful. Save it for when you really want to make a statement.
This is a great scoring tip. And whether you have a custom show written for your band, whether you're buying a catalog show, you know, a pre-designed show, and you're getting the score, these are the kind of choices you can make on the fly throughout your season. Hey, that maybe the drill didn't set the bass drummers up well for the unisons to happen. Maybe you can just cut that down to bass 5 only, right? I think that's like a pretty nice way to just zoom out on your score and maybe decide, be a little more choosy about which ones are full unisons.
And
which
if your
ones are,
right heads are facing the audience, it's okay to play those unisons with your right hand.
Absolutely.
Either one, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Your left side's facing, put the right hand. Your right side's facing, put the right hand.
It's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah. I love that. No, we're getting into some good stuff about, you know, how to actually utilize your bass line. Let's go into a little bit more of the experiential advice you can, you know, if you get put in charge of rehearsing the bass line, especially a young bass line, you know, we're you know, in winter, but only in a couple months, we're going to be getting together our fall bass line, which is going to have new kids in it. So what are some things you can do to get kids over their first mental hurdle of like, all right, here's the task. Here's how we approach it. Do you have any good advice for?
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing, threes, for example, you got to start slow, and you got to start with the rebound on the right hand first and foremost. Not
Yep.
so the kids have to understand that that's got to it's like almost a swung double, and learning that's got to rebound, and then that left hand's got to come in the middle. But starting slow and making sure that rebound's there. Check patterns. Check pattern 1 and 2 and 3.
Sure.
Making sure that they know exactly where that first right hand goes.
Playing like the skeleton of any split part
all the
first
checks,
is
yeah.
really important.
Yeah, learning the checks and being able to play your entire show with the check.
Right. And
Is
I know like
essential.
brass players don't always get that same thing, but in percussion, that's such a valuable tool to strip away any ornamentation and just go to the backbone rhythm or the skeleton
Sure,
rhythm.
you can think about it in the brass world as bopping.
Right.
Just playing the attack. Just bopping the attack.
Yep. Right.
Particularly in the high school arena, all of most of the beats are going to be eighth note based. So
Right.
you want to start with some eighth note timing, and I think we touched earlier on just good drumming fundamentals. Like Joe was talking about, if you can play double beat, you can play threes, you can play fours, you can play rolls. So all of those maybe more complex literatures
sure.
are going to come from that fundamental
And you mentioned
unison training.
dynamic expressivity. Like that's something that everybody playing crescendos and decrescendos together can work on their individual abilities to like produce that.
Right, and just timing exercises. I mean, I think it's important for every band. Every band room should have the Tom Hannum check patterns book. That should be in the library. So there's a resource for them, for the kids to go in and learn. And learn how the natural sticking fits. Oh, and now my feet do this. I think that's very important too, is you gotta learn how each basic rhythm fits between your feet.
Probably the bass line is one of the hardest sections in the entire band to fake it with your feet. Like a horn player can get the out of time feet and play whole notes and, but on a bass line, it is such a foundational device. Like it's a tool that must be used. Really,
You're only as good as your feet.
Right. That's my mindset. Do you have another view to that?
Yeah, I mean, syncopation is your whole job as a bass drummer. And kind of going back to Joe's point about just good fundamentals, all of that information about, playing consistent legato strokes, makes you more prepared for when you have to just turn out one on each hand, and play a run of twos down on the end of three or whatever your book calls for.
Right, because if you're playing twos and you have the upbeat of one, digga dump, that left hand is going to be perfectly in time to set up drum three for their attack. You know what I mean?
And if you remember, diggy diggy dum dum, diggy dum dum,
Diggy
you
diggy dum,
you have a
diggy
reference
dum.
for that
Right.
Right.
that you don't necessarily, you may not get if you're only trying to isolate it
Right.
in that
Yeah.
one setting.
This is very important too for young bass drummers and for inexperienced bass drum staff members. The bass drum line needs to sing the entire part. They don't need to be mouth counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, because they're going to be awkward in doing this.
Yeah.
If they're singing like the Chicago Symphony cello section, and they're playing along with their partial, it's got to have that smooth legato
Right.
turnout and back into the drum like that.
Yeah.
That's how you're going to achieve flow and musicality.
Yeah.
Yeah, with high school kids, a lot of times I like to have them play each part in unison. It's like we're all five of us going to play the top bass part for these two measures. We're all five of us going to play the two part. Maybe not every high school program can achieve that, but it's a really good way to get them all to understand.
But at least singing the melody.
Yeah,
in
zoom
your
out.
head, you're singing
Right.
the melody. It's like when you're driving in the car and listening to your favorite song. You usually have the melody memorized within 2 listens. If the song really resonates with you.
It's a good hook. Yeah.
And if it's just good, if it's a good hook, absolutely.
Right.
So writers write good hooks.
Yep. If you can say it, you can play it. Rule with bass drums needs to apply to all 5 drums, not
Absolutely.
just to yours. I know. I can still vividly remember my first couple sectionals as a bass drummer, and I felt like when the parts were moving and I had to get in where I was going, it felt like I had to like touch the hot stove and get off of it,
Right.
like that. And then eventually you can learn to relax and play a full stroke, play a legato stroke, play with some good touch on the
At the end of the day,
sticks,
you're working less hard when you're seeing the whole part as one rather than 1/5 of the part only.
Right.
And in a performance setting, you're not thinking you want to be able to kind of see the long distance away and just let it make it feel good.
Yep. No, that's really good advice for getting players into it and kind of getting their head around it. Be aware of the entire part. Everyone should be practicing fundamental, rudimental skills and the ability to, like stroke types and be able to play check patterns with the full drum line. And then that's what's going to apply to when you break it up, right? And even if kids feel like at first they're having to touch the hot stove and fit into this much space, that eventually they're hearing Chicago Symphony cellos, and they're just part of that beautiful result that they have internalized.
Absolutely.
Ideally. I know there's a lot of value as well. The more that you have a mental picture of what the music is happening, then the better you're going to be able to participate. And that includes like what the snares and quads do at a certain point, and like what the band is doing. Is this the big moment where the band is da na na and you're jump jump jump? That helps a lot versus just like I have my black and white piece of the page, like to kind of know what you're contributing to.
Yeah, it's a little tricky to teach that to younger players. We touched on earlier, that you want them to be aware of the other things that are happening on the field,
Aware.
but also know that they can't really trust the information that they're getting from their ears.
Sure.
So it's a little bit counterintuitive, I think, in that way. Sometimes when you
Being able to have MP3s these days too, like everyone has an MP3 that you can make for your members, and if you're not doing that, then you're kind of doing a disservice.
Yeah, at this point.
At this point,
it should be available.
Yeah, in 2024, it's available.
Right.
Going into 2025.
Right.
Let's make sure all the kids are able to listen to the MP3 of maybe just the bass part or maybe just the battery part, and they're be able to play along and practice with that.
Yep.
That way they're getting that hook, they're getting that melody,
Right.
burn into their brains for better or for worse.
Yep.
Yeah, some of my students have an app. I wish I could remember what it's called, but they basically just plug in the MIDI bass drum parts and they can remove their part if they want to fit it in. They can leave it in if they want to hear the whole thing.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's a really cool tool that some of these guys at the Drum Corps and Mystique have been using.
Yep. If you know what that is, throw that in the comments for us, please. If you know what that app is, and if we source it as well, we'll throw it down there for you guys. While we're on the experiential kind of like teaching kids how to actually do the thing, how to be bass drummers, I know that like once you get out on the field, again, bass drummers are frequently in the back of the entire form. They're going to be spread apart, and you guys said such a great phrase earlier. You have to memorize the right version of wrong or something. What was your?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's not gonna sound to that performer the way that it does in the front of the field.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of explaining that needs to go on to really make that clear to a young performer, particularly.
Right.
And even people that are at the top of the game, have to be reminded of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's like, hey, you can't trust what you're hearing. The downbeats are going to be there. Just know that it's like Mike Jackson used to always talk about starting an MP3. It's like the MP3 plays from the point where you press play. You're just changing the point where you press play. So you've got these kind of overlapping time that just moves forward. And as if rhythm is precise, then all of those subdivisions will fall right where they're supposed to, and you can kind of line it up that way.
Yeah. So out on the field, how can you reassure people who are doing this for the first time that it's headed the right way, that they're thinking about it the right way? What are some things that a staff member standing out front can kind of give some reassuring advice and like, yes, more of that. Try again. Yes, that, or no, that. What are some good like?
In the words of Brian Mason, 1 in a row. Congrats, guys. Let's go for 2 in a row.
Yeah.
Oh no, let's go back to 1 in a row. Once
Sure.
you get it done a few times, you got to remember what it felt like to do it.
Yep.
And then don't change anything. Remember the process that you just took to make that work and make that great, and then
Yep.
remember it. It's reps.
So
Reps of doing it right.
band directors who are maybe not the percussion person, but they're listening to the entire score. They're listening to their whole band and the product that comes out. Bass drummers are 5 or 4 human beings, each with their own brain, each with their own rep that they just gave. Bass drums, y'all are slow. Okay, right? So this gets into a sticky territory, right? What advice do you have for the band directors? What advice do you have for the players?
Well, make
the
sure that
techs?
if you're using a metronome, make sure it's in the back of the field and it's not on the podium. That's huge because a lot of times I'll go to a rehearsal and I'll see the metronome on the front or the band directors in the tower counting with the speakers facing the band.
Facing the band?
Facing the band. So
Right.
of course it's going to be slow.
Physics would not
Physics
allow that.
does not allow that.
Right. That is not the way. So we need tempo information because of the speed of sound
Right.
to go from behind towards the listener, towards
Right.
the audience. So
Well,
metronome in the
and-
back.
Yeah, the
drum line.
metronome is really your biggest tool to give them information that they can trust, as long as it's coming from the right geography. But yeah, then it's just you've got to remind them of that. It can't be the Met is out in September and we don't use it anymore. We need to
Still have reminders.
have reminders, put the Met back in for a couple reps, and then take it back out.
Listen to just the drum line. Listen to just the bass line if you want to. Kind of. Right.
But to your point, also I think there's a lot of nuance. Like figuring out what the root cause of that tempo issue was. Because the macro slowed down.
Mm-hmm.
It may have been caused by someone coming in early, and everyone reacted to that.
Right.
So for the player, one, sending good information to your teammates, but also not reacting too much to what
Right.
you're hearing.
And the bass drums, you're slow. Okay, so why were they slow? I mean, just saying you're slow doesn't help.
Was it slow feet across all
Right,
5 of you because
right.
it's a hard drill move?
But also when you have a 50-person band, you have one band director. They have a lot of other things to worry about.
do.
So it's like bass drums, you're slow, and they have to move on to the flutes and the
Right.
one flag that was in a different zip code. Versus the other flags. And
Right.
they have a lot of more things to worry about. So. That's a good question for.
Well, I think my 2 cents on that would just be to, if possible, band director, if possible, teacher, try to give very specific comments. If you know that the part where you experienced a tempo issue was when it's the bottom bass carrying
Right.
the rhythm, just tell the bottom bass that there's.
And
you know
I
what
bet
mean?
you, probably a good 80% of the time that they're slow is going to be a feed issue.
Sure.
Feet being at a time.
Right.
When you talk about the difference between being slow and being late, or being fast and being early in a bass line, particularly at the beginner, intermediate level, they don't have enough time as an individual player to even be slow at anything. It's probably just 1 or 2 notes at a time.
Yep.
So you're dealing with slow from a macro split amongst 5 people. It's all being caused by
Yeah.
either lateness or sometimes early. Like you can play if I enter early for a 16th note 2's run, that 16th note space is wide. And now that sounds slow to an outside listener, but really my error as the second bass was
Sure.
that I entered early
Right.
Yep.
for that 8th note.
So like lining up the skeleton rhythm, the foundational rhythm of the part,
The check pattern, yeah.
the check pattern, right?
And I
just,
think if
like,
there's
bring
any
that back
doubt,
home.
yeah, if you have any doubt in your mind at all,
Make sure it's for the check.
just check it, and then that'll be enough information for them.
Play the check. We all use different verbiage, but play the skeleton rhythm, play the check rhythm.
The
play
example, bum, 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 or 2's, if that's not in time, let's play the check. Bum, 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 bum. We're just playing the 8th note. So we're going to
Right.
get the 8th note skeleton perfect.
Yes.
And then we're going to add the left, drum 1, add the left hand.
And this is okay stuff to do in your whole season.
Yeah.
If it's like, it is okay. Hopefully you've had the players kind of learn the check to the whole show.
Absolutely.
And then you're able to say, hey, let's just hear letter C, bass drums play the check.
Yeah,
And they can
in
do that.
ensemble. It's
ensemble.
like totally fine. When I've taught high school groups, we're checking the whole bass solo all the way through September, and they may not play the written part until the last month of the season. But you're really establishing the hierarchy there, right? Like we need to have good timing for the whole band, period. And then anything that's a little bit more expressive or a little bit, more challenging literature can always fit inside that.
Yeah. So it seems like some foundational building blocks for everybody to reference would be number one, obviously like being able to wear your instrument. You can work on that at the beginning of your journey. Number two, do you have good drummer skills? Are you building your foundational percussion skills with check patterns, stroke types, your ability to be a musician at large is important. Then can I march with my feet in time as 5 players or 4 players? Can we all get our feet in time and march around? And then can we play the check rhythm of whatever we're being given, anything split? Can I achieve the check? And then can I add on the ornamentation or the layers, right?
As far as wearing the drums, Jeff, are you a proponent for stands? Or, I mean, I think I kind of know the answer, but what do you think about that?
It's, I mean, at the highest level, it's really just a cultural difference. I don't feel, for younger players, you want to wear the drum. There's a lot of variance that you can have, especially with a newer student, if they're playing on a stand. They may not be standing close enough to the drum or far enough away from the drum.
Right.
The
muscle memory of playing in the center is going to be different.
They may be looking around and changing their set position as they do so.
Right.
So I think, I would say, especially for beginner students, the stands, I would prefer to wear the drum.
Prefer to wear the drums. If they're still building up their physical aptitude to carry the drum, which by the way, like doesn't need to take 6 months to be able to carry your drum. Like if you're putting the right person on the right drum, I get it. It's going to be new muscles at first.
Yeah.
Even if you switch from being a snare drummer to a bass drummer or a bass drummer to a snare drummer, and like I don't know what the poundage difference is between a second bass and a snare, but it's not that much different pounds. It's just different muscles in your back. There's going to be a period of adjustment where it's like, this is not 100% comfortable, but give it a month of wearing it, and it goes away, right?
You kind of pick and choose your battles, you're in band camp, right, and you've got a whole block of subs. Like I think it's okay. Wear the stands
during the learning time.
They're going to be wearing them for 3 hours tonight during ensemble.
Right.
You can kind of work your way up to that.
Right.
Build that strength.
But like flip side of the coin, if it was like every time the drum line goes away, they're always on stands, and then they're only wearing them when with the full band.
Right.
You're gonna tire out very fast.
You'll tire out, and you're gonna have really some problems getting the mallet heads in the middle.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about that for a second, because this is important, and I think I'll quote Shane, our boss, on this one. The humans can see what looks wrong right away before you play a note. As soon as the drumline brings their sticks out, if you get those mallets are all over different places on the heads, like it just doesn't look right. And there's a musical result aspect of this that needs to come out. So give your pitch for.
I'd say on the vast majority of judging tapes that I make is for bass drum lines, and for snare lines and quad lines. Every school has windows. A lot of schools have mirrors to where you can see like a full body reflection. You got to get in front of those mirrors, and like bass drums, get in front of them and make sure that everyone has the same angle, and that you're, no matter which way you choose to play, make sure that everyone has the same angle. Make sure that you're in the middle of the head, and it's okay to put the butt of your hand to let it touch the rim to find that spot, so that way you have a reference to where the center is.
Yep.
A lot of people are like, no man, here's the rim. You got to be like this.
Yeah.
No, first of all, you have a bad angle, so now this is not going to work. Just keeping that elbow nice and relaxed by your side, and just find your middle spot, and just stay in that middle spot. But you have to have the muscle memory to do it.
Right.
You just have to get in there and you have to see it.
I think there's a lot of emphasis on how you can't see your hands, which is a big challenge for sure. But you can use what you can see. If you've got an 18-inch drum, you can see from here back, and you can kind of pinpoint that spot. And if you need to draw a little line on your arm so that what's my rim to hand relationship.
Right. Is my thumbnail touching the rim right here on this claw? Okay, good. That means I'm in the center. You know, or am I touching the rim here?
Right.
You know, the bigger drums are just gonna be
Yeah,
more
you've
back
got to
here.
you've got to like actually push
Right.
out a little bit to get
Right.
there. Right.
But again, it's this muscle memory, and you're going to get that by wearing the drums because the stand's going to be different. Most of the time, when people are playing with stands, they're standing really close, like right up on top of the stand or up on top
Right.
of the drum. You know.
Yeah.
So,
And you know what? Every company's carriers vary by like this much about what that distance is. So like you kind of have to be in your realistic situation to train for what you're going to do on the field, right? So for the record, let's put it on the record. Out of all the bass lines on earth, are there any who shouldn't rehearse in front of mirrors for a time and work on that? Or every bass line would benefit from mirror time?
yeah, I mean, if you have a full time staff member, then you might not need it.
Yeah,
But,
bass tech at every rehearsal. But
Yeah.
Every bass line should play in a mirror.
we'll put it on the record. Every single bass line
you c-
on
yeah.
the planet Earth should play in a mirror.
Quote me.
Period. Quote Jeff Watkins.
Because even if you do have a great tech in front of them, it's so valuable to see what your instructor sees.
Yeah.
And get that feedback that
Right.
you only get in a mirror. When I was marching,
My instructor did not lie to me. He or she they were right the entire time.
Yeah.
there's just that light bulb. Oh, I get it. I'm slicing this
Yeah.
way, or I need to
Right.
know
Yep.
turn over or under, whatever.
Whenever
it
my
may be.
left hand plays, my right hand's doing this.
Oh yeah. The one hand plays and the other hand's wandering.
The grocery
Yep.
cart curb feelers.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
But I would go to a parking lot and drum in my car window when I was a drum corps member,
Yep.
indoor member.
Yep. And just watch like where is that mallet head going when I turn out? Is it going to the same place relative to my body, relative to the drum every time I turn out? Am I getting the same result again and again?
Yeah, when I was teaching, Tony King and Sean McElroy and those guys at Blue Knights back in the day, I mean, they were religiously in front of a window or a mirror window, car window, whatever it was, religiously like on breaks.
Yep.
Going over there and making sure that everything's, you hear what you see.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Right. And that includes that tacit hand that's wandering away. It's like, oh, that's not a great bass line.
Right.
Yeah, you need to get
Yeah.
that visual feedback.
Come on now.
To really fully understand
Yep.
the sensations.
So the next heater of a topic I want to talk about is tuning the bass line. And again, like, let's not differ between like how Vanguard does it versus the Blue Devils. Let's go down to the percussion instructor who maybe wasn't on the bass line, or if they were, their instructor tuned their drums when they were there, or the band director who, hey, you know what, that's starting to not sound as good as it did a month ago. What, walk us into this just about how to do this well. What's your miniature version of tuning tips?
I'd say it all depends on how you muffle first and foremost. You got to get the right muffling scheme, whatever works best for you. Personally, I like using. There used to be an upholstery shop in Pensacola, Florida, that I was a regular at. He had like a laser cutter, and I had my measurements all figured out. But he's no longer in business, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's plenty of companies
There's
now
plenty
who
of
you
companies
can
that do
order it
that.
from.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I'm a proponent of shell. Putting on the shell and letting it stick off about 1/4 of an inch off the bearing edge.
Yep.
That's my system. Like I love that. That way you just put the head on, and you're good to go.
Yep. So this is
and it's there forever. You don't have to remuffle. Usually you shouldn't have to remuffle, but maybe every 3 years or so.
right. So again, just to break down what the mechanics of that are, if you had your bass drum, you took the head off, and then you're putting foam, which we can maybe put in the comments some recommendations of foam densities, or maybe Jeff can run us through them. But you'd put some foam with like some adhesive on the inside of the wooden shell, and you'd run it around that inner edge, but like as if you lined it up where it wasn't sticking out at all, but then make it poke out like 1/4 inch, just a little bit. It's sticking out beyond where the wood is.
Beyond the bearing edge.
And the idea is when you put the head on, the head is going to squish into that foam a little bit, creating a muffled sound and controlling the tone and the length of the sound.
And the sizes are going to be different. Bigger drum head.
Big drum, big
2
foam.
inches, then get down to where you're at about maybe an inch. Or
Little drum,
somewhere
thin
in there for
foam.
a little drum thin foam.
Yep.
Yeah, we can put some recommended
Yeah.
sizes in
Sizes.
the comments.
Liquid nails for the adhesive works
Liquid
great.
nails is good. 3M90 spray
3M90 is
adhesive is
fantastic.
great. That's hardware store purchases. But I know that like for some of the directors out there are like, wait a minute, I paid 20 grand for this battery, and you're telling me to go to the hardware store and spray some stuff on it and put foam. Like I know it sounds crazy, but their bass drums are one instrument in the band that has a small DIY part of the maintenance. to make them sound good. And if you do it this method, you only really have to do it like
time.
once every 3 years, 4 years,
4 years, 5 years.
you know, and when you have to do it again, you rip all the foam out, you know, maybe take some light sandpaper and clean up your surface and do it again. But that's really nice because if you're doing, you know, 1 or 2 head changes a year, a lot of high schools are on that one every year or 1 head change a year or once every other year on the baseline. You know, that is a lot of the country. Obviously, whatever you can afford, more head changes can be good, but
There's the Power Max and like the Evans, like the MS
Right.
series, that doesn't have the internal muffling.
yep,
Or I'm sorry, the Power Max and the MX that has the
MX
internal
have the
muffling.
white, the white strips.
Inserts and all that.
If that's
Pre-muffled.
if that's your thing, then
But it does the same. The intended effect is similar. It's supposed to shorten and control the sound, and help your bass drums not just be ringer dingers, right?
yeah. But I mean, to my ears, they're a little more ringy and a little more boomy when you have the internal muffling system versus doing it with the bass drum foam, like the
foam mounted on
Lone
the
Star foam or
Right,
California Drums foam.
right.
Yeah.
Yep. So and then
Shout out to Dan, California Drums.
we mentioned earlier about putting foam on the head itself, which is another way to do it. Obviously, then when you change heads, you're putting foam on the new head, right? And that would be right around the inside of the hoop, correct?
Yeah, so a lot of, especially back in the day, Joe was talking about cadets in the '80s and '90s, all the way up through their whole existence.
A lot of groups are doing that.
We're doing air conditioning foam on the outside, so you put the head on, you tighten down all your tension rods, you get decent tension on the head, and then you're just using caulk. Yeah, it's the silicone 2 clear caulk, and you just draw a circle around the edge, squish it down, and you're done. It doesn't really take that long. I know some other groups were doing the same thing on the inside of the head. You take one of the claws and put a pencil in there and just run it around.
Yeah.
It around the inside of the head. You can put a layer of foam in there.
For years, Vanguard was doing that, where they'd take like a quad head and they'd put it in the middle and they'd take the foam
Yep.
and go around on the inside.
At Mystique,
Right.
yeah. When I marched there, we had
When I first started Mystique, that was their tuning method that was already set in stone. It's like,
Inside
don't
foam.
touch this.
all the way up through I think 17 or 18. I started putting the high resilience foam in the heads.
Yep.
But yeah, it kind of goes back to our conversation about what's the role of the group, what kind of projection are you looking for, what type of bass drum timbre, if you want a little bit more attack sound versus more tone, are you looking at a single ply head versus a 2-ply head? Are you using heads with ink on them? All of these factors are gonna
Yeah, if you want to
affect the
really
sound.
get out all the options that are available today, there's many different results. But I think as a 30,000 feet view of taking care of your bass line, doing some kind of muffling and doing it in a consistent way is really foundationally important.
Yeah.
Right.
I think for a lot of high school programs, the pre-muffled options work just fine. And if you're going with the 2-ply option to get a little bit more tone quality than that
Heads
really
last longer,
that really
yeah.
punchy attack.
Right.
That's going to serve most smaller band programs.
So
Band directors, the 2-ply would be like the Remo Emperor. The 1-ply would be the Ambassador. Then, of course, with Evans, you have your MS2s and your MS or MX2s and 1s. So.
Right, 1-ply versus 2-ply. And again, 1 is going to give you the more punch, but the heads may not last as long because, again, it's only 1 piece of plastic versus 2. Kind of depends on how you're playing and approaching them.
I love a single ply head, for drum corps or for world class indoor. That attack sound and the purity that you get from just one piece of plastic.
Right.
And you're rarely going to put your mallet through one. You're rarely going to break one. If anything, you're going to pull.
Right.
You'll put on the top drum. You might pull a head, but you're rarely going to break it.
Yep. When you're buying your bass drum heads, it is good wisdom to buy an extra head for every single drum because what are you going to do when somebody's tuning outside of the show and
Someone falls.
Right.
Or someone gets hit by a tuba.
Or even, it's not even, exactly. It's not even the player's fault or the tech's fault at all. It could be walking through the parking lot and some other band's prop person who couldn't see pushes something into your head and,
you just never
it could be
know.
anything. So having an extra head for every drum that's on your truck with your ensemble when you go to shows, Krush.
And find one
Yep.
band dad that you can teach to help you change
That's
the
right.
NASCAR pit crew really fast.
Somebody has that bit for their drill, for their
Absolutely.
impact driver. Loves that. Yeah, exactly.
We're taking
Yep.
them off, not putting them back on.
Yep. So for tuning the drums, I think we can foundational things. When you tune any drum, you're trying to make all of if you tapped around the edge at each lug, at each tension rod, you'd want to get the same pitch. So that's called clearing a head. I think you always need to like have a clear head all the way around. It's not like you want a C sharp here and a D sharp there and an F there. Like they should all be the same note if you tapped around. And you can get out a tuner and unify your approach. But given that information, that both ideally every single tension rod on both sides of the drum are the same note, then which pitches would you pick for your ideal baseline, your 16, 18, 20, 24, 28?
So I think the
Good place to start.
the standard, I guess, is DADFA. People talk about D, A, D, F sharp, A. The easiest way to talk about it is C, G, C, E, F, G. Excuse me, G on top.
Yeah.
C, G, C, E, G from the bottom
C, G, C. Oh,
from the
okay.
bottom up.
C, G, C, E, C.
E, G. So the general wisdom is a fifth and a fourth between your bottom three
I think that's the most important right there.
intervals.
Okay.
Agreed. Yeah, and then typically it's a triad in the top three. So that gives you octaves on 3 and 5 and octaves on 1 and 4, and then your 2 drum is kind of creating that tension with the triad on the way up.
So whatever you pick for your bottom bass, a perfect fifth up to bass 4, a perfect fourth up to bass 3, and then you're voicing like a major triad off of 3. Right?
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And I like to take the top drum just maybe a little bit higher for a little bit of extra.
If you can get a
pop.
perfect fourth from 2 to 1,
If the heads will allow.
yeah.
If the right.
If you can get it, if you get the perfect fourth,
Sure.
Just
love
a
it.
little bit more
Yeah.
separation
Yep.
helps.
When you're tuning bass heads, is there like a pacing thing? Like you don't just want to, or I mean, like what's good advice to not pull the heads?
Make sure you're giving CPR to the head when you're changing.
Okay.
So
So you put the head on. That's like seating the head a little bit.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, just like you're doing with like your drum set toms,
Right.
Or you should be doing.
And not like with your whole human force, but like some.
the bigger drum,
Right.
Bigger the drum. You want to give a little bit. You want to let that glue start to crack,
Sure.
and do its thing, and yeah.
Good advice.
I'll take my time. If I'm shooting for a D on bottom, and all those, the established chord from there, I'll probably start at a C. For indoor, for Mystique, we'll tune to an E flat on bottom, E flat, B flat, E flat, G, B, B. I like to take the top a little extra.
Yep.
But just start with the DADFA, let them play on that for a day or a block, at least.
Sure.
And then take them up to pitch.
Because they're going to go back down tremendously, like
right when you put the heads on.
when you first
and
put the
play.
heads on, your drums are going to be so low. It's going
Yeah.
to be super bassy.
This is important. This is for everybody. Again, you did a head change. You put them on. You followed the instructions, maybe from this episode or online, other wisdom you got.
Be prepared for them to not sound good for a couple of days, and then go in and dial it. Let them play on them, and let them.
the plastic kind of hardens
Yeah.
as you maintain that pitch.
Yeah.
And really, I mean, if you're using proper lubrication or you're putting wax on the bearing edges, on all of that kind of drum maintenance stuff, you can take them all the way up to pitch.
Good point. You need to lube those tension rods. You
Yep.
know,
So when you're putting on your heads, putting either some wax on the bearing edge, the wooden bearing edge before you put the head on, and then also each and every tension rod, some white lithium grease or some Vaseline, some proper lubricant so that those are going to turn
Slick
equally.
50,
Yeah.
anything like that. Yeah.
Yep. Nobody calls me that anymore. I know.
That was your nickname on the high school track team.
Yeah, it was.
right?
Yeah, Slick 50. Everybody knew I was fast as lightning. Well, guys, I really appreciate you taking some time to spread some knowledge. I know that we didn't hit every possible aspect of bass drum wisdom, but I think that we gave really a hefty sack full of wisdom here today on how to pick your players, pick your instruments, maintain and operate your equipment, the role they play in the band, and really just for instructors, what can I listen for when I'm standing in front of the bass line? And I think listening for the check pattern, timing of what your music that's coming out, looking at the bass drummer's feet, asking if they can sing the entire part to you. If you can check those boxes, you're going to be ahead of a lot of bass drum lines in the country who are out there doing this.
That's when you're flowing. That's when you have flow.
That's right. Yep. Well, please follow up with questions in the comments. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Joe.
Absolutely.
You know, there are guests on the podcast, but we're all full-time at Synced Up Design. So reach out to us anytime. We can follow up with answers to your questions, you know, and give us another good idea for another good episode in the comments when you get a chance. Thanks, everybody. Till next time.